All right, so today we're really diving into something that feels pretty massive.
It is massive.
Yeah, huge global challenge, but also like a hotbed for these cutting-edge innovations.
Absolutely.
We're talking about machine learning for diabetes prediction.
Yeah.
And, you sent over a really interesting stack of research articles on this. And I'm itching to get into how algorithms can maybe like change the game for millions of people.
Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely. And it's, we're not even just talking about will someone develop diabetes or not, but predicting complications and personalizing treatment, like the whole 9 yards.
Yeah, exactly. Like
Yeah,
how can this actually impact people's lives?
exactly.
But before we get ahead of ourselves, let's sort of like set the stage right. Like, why is this such a big deal?
Yeah.
One of the articles cites this like pretty startling statistic from the World Health Organization.
Right.
In 2016 alone, diabetes was responsible for 1.6 million deaths globally,
Wow.
which is it's a hard number to even fathom.
It is.
Like that's a life lost every 20 seconds.
Oh, yeah, it really highlights the urgency of it all, right? I mean, and the impact goes so far beyond even just those numbers, right?
What?
We're talking about a disease that affects quality of life. It's a
Yeah.
huge burden on healthcare systems all over the world. It's definitely a global challenge.
Definitely. And something that you pointed out, before we even hit record here,
Yeah.
understanding the different types of diabetes is really key here, right? Because it's not just one thing.
Exactly.
We got type 1, type 2, and they're pretty different.
Yeah, they're very different. Type 1 is, often diagnosed in childhood or adolescence.
Right.
And it's an autoimmune condition where the body actually attacks those insulin-producing cells in the pancreas.
Okay.
And what's interesting is that one of the papers you sent mentioned that type 1 can actually be asymptomatic in the early stages.
Wait, so someone could have it and not even know?
Exactly.
Wow.
Because the pancreas might still be partially functional early on, so it's kind of masking the problem. But by the time those more obvious symptoms show up, a significant portion of those insulin-producing cells might be damaged.
And so that's a huge part of this, isn't it? Like early detection is just absolutely crucial.
Absolutely.
And then we've got type 2, which, we hear about more often. And this is usually linked to things like diet and exercise.
Right.
It develops when the body becomes resistant to insulin or just doesn't produce enough.
Exactly. And this is where the research is so interesting because we're seeing how machine learning can be applied to both types.
Right.
And potentially revolutionize, how we approach everything from prevention to treatment.
And speaking of revolutionizing, let's talk about just the sea of data
Oh,
that's
yeah.
in diabetes research right now.
Huge.
Because, between advances in biotechnology, high throughput sequencing, all the electronic health records that are being generated, we're practically drowning in data.
It's true. It's the age of big data, right?
Right.
But here's the thing that's not a bad thing. It's like having all the pieces of a massive complex puzzle, right? The challenge is putting it all together in a way that's meaningful.
Right. And so that's where this idea of machine learning comes in.
Exactly.
It's like instead of us trying to manually sift through these mountains of data,
Right.
we can use algorithms to help us find those patterns and make sense of it all.
Precisely. Yeah. Leverage the power of computers to do what they do best, which is, analyze huge amounts of information and find patterns that we might miss and hopefully help us make smarter decisions about diabetes.
Okay, so we've got like this mountain of data, right? And we keep saying machine learning.
Yeah.
But before we get into the really exciting stuff, can we like rewind a little
Yeah.
for our listeners who might not be like, computer programmers?
Yeah.
Can you give us just the basics of how machine learning works?
Yeah. So at its very core, it's about training algorithms on data.
Right.
So that they can learn to make predictions or decisions
Ugh.
without being explicitly programmed for like every single scenario.
Okay.
So it's kind of like,
I need an analogy. I always need an analogy.
Okay. How about this, like teaching a kid to ride a bike?
Oh?
Right. So you give them some basic instructions.
Right.
But the real learning happens through experience, right?
Right.
They try, they fall, they adjust, and eventually they figure it out.
Okay.
So it's similar with algorithms.
So the experience is like all that data.
Exactly.
And the bike riding is like, will this person develop diabetes?
Exactly.
Got it.
And just like there are, different ways to learn to ride a bike.
Right.
There are different types of machine learning.
Okay.
Right? We've got things like supervised learning.
Okay.
Where we basically feed the algorithm labeled data.
Labeled how so?
So in this case, it might be information about people who have and have not developed diabetes.
Okay.
Along with all those potential risk factors.
Got it.
And the algorithm uses those examples to basically learn, like, what kind of patterns in the data might indicate a higher risk.
So then you feed it data about a new person, and it can be like based on what we've seen before.
Exactly. Based on what I've learned, this is your likelihood.
This is what we think.
Yeah.
Wow. Okay, what about this unsupervised learning?
Yeah, so unsupervised learning is a little different.
Okay.
We don't give it those neat labels.
What do you mean?
So it's more like saying, okay, here's a mountain of data about people with diabetes.
Okay.
Go figure it out.
Oh, wow.
See what you can find.
So it's really uncovering those hidden insights.
Exactly.
The stuff that we don't even know to look for.
Exactly. And that can be incredibly valuable in a field like this where there's still so much we don't know.
Right. Like diabetes is complex.
It's very complex.
Okay. So, I mean, this is already like blow my mind a little bit.
Yeah.
But I want to like really bring this home for people.
Okay.
In the research that you were looking at, like, what are some of the ways that this is actually being used to predict diabetes? Like, what's got you excited?
So one area that's really generating a lot of buzz is using machine learning to actually predict the onset of type 2 diabetes.
Which is huge, because if you know someone is high risk, you can intervene.
Exactly. And that's the whole goal, right?
Yeah.
Is to be able to do something about it. And the research is really promising.
Yeah.
Some studies are showing that these algorithms can be incredibly accurate.
Okay.
Sometimes even better than our traditional risk assessment tools.
Wow. Okay.
Which is pretty amazing when you think about it.
Yeah.
So we're talking about potentially, like you said, changing the game for millions of people.
Right.
And what I find really fascinating is that these algorithms are not just looking at the usual suspects.
Which are?
So, age,
Right.
BMI, family history.
Right.
Although those are still important factors.
Okay.
But they're also like uncovering less obvious predictors
Like what?
hidden within all that data.
Give me an example.
So, for example, they're starting to identify specific blood biomarkers that seem to be really strongly linked to diabetes risk. Interesting.
And we're not just talking about elevated glucose levels here.
Okay.
It's things like certain lipid profiles, inflammatory markers,
Yeah.
Indicators that might not scream diabetes on their own.
Right.
But when you combine them with other factors, it could be like a huge red flag.
So it's like this very personalized risk assessment.
Exactly.
Incredible.
And it goes beyond blood work, too.
Okay.
Some models incorporate genetic data, lifestyle factors, even information from wearable sensors.
Oh, wow.
Like, those Fitbits and Apple Watches, tracking things like activity levels, sleep patterns.
Interesting.
So it's really about like piecing together this much more complete picture of an individual's risk.
Wow. So it's like we're not just, talking about in the future doctors having this really incredible tool to figure out who's at risk.
Yeah.
But it's a whole new world of personalized medicine. It's pretty mind-blowing.
It really is. And I mean, that's just the tip of the iceberg, right? Because we're also talking about using this to predict complications, right? Because diabetes,
exactly.
It's not just about like, oh, what's your blood sugar?
Right. It's not just about managing blood sugar.
Right. It's about all the other stuff.
Yeah. All those long-term health issues
right, exactly.
can really impact someone's life.
So let's get into that. What kind of complications are we talking about predicting here?
Well, so take something like diabetic retinopathy, which a lot of people don't realize is actually a leading cause of vision loss.
Really?
In people with diabetes.
Yeah.
And early detection is like absolutely crucial.
Right.
But the good news is algorithms are now being trained to actually analyze those retinal images.
Okay.
Those pictures they take of the back of your eye.
Right.
And they can spot these tiny little signs of damage that even like a trained ophthalmologist might miss.
So you're saying like we could actually save people's sight with this?
Exactly. That's the hope, right?
Wow.
By catching it early enough when there's still time to intervene.
That's incredible. Okay, so we've got retinopathy we talked about earlier about kidney function.
Right, diabetic nephropathy.
Yeah.
Which can be a huge issue. And even things like diabetic neuropathy, which is nerve damage.
I mean, is there anything this can't do? Like, seriously, this is incredible.
It's definitely promising, and it's a rapidly evolving field, but I think it's important to remember it's still, relatively early days.
Right.
And there are challenges we have to overcome.
Like what?
Well, one of the biggest ones is just the sheer amount of data.
Okay.
That's needed to train these algorithms well.
Right. We're talking about teaching a machine to understand the human body.
Yeah, exactly. It's incredibly complex.
Yeah.
And it requires a ton of information to really train these models effectively.
And not just like a ton of information, but
It has to be good information.
right, like good quality and
High quality data and diverse data.
right,
Because we want to make sure these models work for everyone.
not just a small group of people.
Yeah, exactly. And that's something that researchers are very aware of.
Yeah.
They're working really hard to make sure that these data sets are representative of the population and to address any potential biases.
Okay, good. Because I was going to say, like, we don't want to create this technology that only works for, a certain group of people,
Absolutely. It has to be equitable, it has to be accessible.
right, for it to really make a difference.
Exactly.
Okay, so more data, we've got to be thinking about bias. What else?
Well, another area that I think is really, really interesting is how we can use machine learning to actually improve how we manage diabetes on like a day-to-day basis.
Okay.
So imagine algorithms that can take data from things like continuous glucose monitors, insulin pumps, even like food logs and activity trackers,
Okay.
and then provide these like incredibly personalized recommendations.
So it's like having an old diabetes coach.
Exactly, in your pocket, 24/7.
Wow.
And that can be so empowering for people living with diabetes because it gives them that real-time feedback. It helps them make decisions about their care, and it can even alert their doctor if something seems off.
Oh, wow, that's incredible. I've got to say, like, before we started this deep dive,
Yeah.
I knew that machine learning was a big deal. I knew it was going to change things,
Yeah.
but I really had no idea how much potential it had
Yeah.
to, like, totally revolutionize how we think about diabetes.
It's pretty amazing, and I think the biggest takeaway is that, yes, this is a huge challenge.
Millions of people.
Millions of people around the world are affected by this. But there is hope because this technology offers a really powerful new tool
Right.
to prevent cases, detect complications earlier, and ultimately improve the lives of those living with diabetes.
Yeah, and even though there are still some hurdles to overcome, like we talked about, the research is so promising.
It's an exciting time to be following this field, that's for
It
sure.
really is. And I can't wait to see what the future holds.
Me neither. Who knows? Maybe one day we'll be having a very different conversation about diabetes.
I like the sound of that.
One where it doesn't hold the same kind of power over people's lives,
Absolutely. Okay, well, on that note, that is a wrap on this deep dive into machine learning and diabetes.
Yeah.
We explored some really cutting-edge research. I feel like my mind is blown.
As always.
I hope our listeners feel the same way.
Yeah, they have a lot to dive into on their own.
As always, thank you so much for joining us, and keep on diving deep.